Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We're going to get started. This is the Tuesday, June 13th work session. And we're going to start. We need some direction requested on two different items. The first one will be on the student council scholarship that Mr. Bates had spoke to us about. We need to make a decision whether we would like to have a work session on it, which if we do, we would first decide if we want to set up a scholarship fund. It would also give our city attorney an opportunity to do the research to find out if we can even do that. And then lastly, it would also give us an opportunity to have a discussion about what parameters we would want to set for what it was for, whether it be college only, trade school, whatever. So I need to know what your thoughts are on whether that's something we should pursue in a work session or not. So I'll open it up to any questions or comments amongst us. Lisa?
I guess I don't think altogether it's a bad idea. I just think that maybe that would be something we would need to discuss perhaps next year for budgeting. I think it's too late to even consider that right now. And so I would propose to maybe look at it next year before we go through all of this with the budgeting. We've already gone through all of this, so it's, in my mind, I think it's too late.
Feels, Kyle?
Thanks, Mayor. I guess my thought is, yeah, I mean, I like the idea, trying to incentivize folks that are, the kids that are in those student councils are some of the brightest and most active and engaged. We got some Rotary members here, and we get to hear, we get the pleasure of hearing from a lot of the students of the month who are often sitting on those councils, and man, those kids' rap sheets, their resumes are longer than mine. So it's super impressive to hear from those kids. I'd love to incentivize them, continue in their academics, but it feels a little bit more appropriate for board of trustees to explore a program like that, or even, if a city-related agency wanted to take a look at it. I serve as liaison to Casper Youth Council, so I'm happy to relay, a program like that to that group, and see if that's something they'd be willing to entertain, because that makes a lot more sense. Casper Youth Council, it's kind of dealing with that demographic more, so I'm happy to bring that up at our next meeting there. But it just feels more appropriate for either of those two avenues as opposed to our agency.
Anybody else thoughts? Sure.
I would just say I wholeheartedly support the idea of a scholarship, of course, but just a couple of questions about, timing is one, but also it's the idea of us devoting taxpayer dollars toward that, which I'm not sure, I don't know. I'm just not sure that that's aligned with what our function as a city council. Although if we had, I don't know what's available, but some other more discretionary kind of funds that's not maybe perhaps direct taxpayer money. I don't know if that even exists, but I would feel better about that. I'm like I said, the idea of tax dollars going there.
Well,
not that it's not a good cause. I absolutely support the idea.
Agreed. And I would tell you, the idea of using taxpayer money doesn't bother me nearly as much, considering we support nonprofits with it. So if we're helping guide our youth,
that's true,
into an area, what does bother me, and I mentioned this that night with Mr. Bates, is this scholarship would literally only be for kids that are wanting to go to college. Not all of our constituents go to college. And so what does that do for the non-college going student? Who are we to incentivize anybody to do anything? I don't know. It's just a thought, but yes, please.
Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's quite all right.
So I do like the idea, but I also like Kyle's idea of going through the Youth Empowerment Council, because if we say, oh, we'll do it, well, now we have to go through applicants and pick. It's a lot. It's a big commitment. It seems like a small thing. Oh, just a small scholarship, but it's actually going to be a good bit of work. So I feel like if we supported someone who was actually going to do the legwork, like the council, and they came to us and said, hey, here's our proposal, here's what we'll do, here's how much we're asking, I would be a lot more comfortable with that.
Okay, so what I'm hearing then, just not only the timing issue, but it seems to me that maybe we let Mr. Gamroth take this back to the youth council and maybe come back with some different ideas or some other ideas. Does that sound appropriate to everybody? Everybody good with that? Kyle, you're okay with doing that?
Happy to.
Okay. There we go. Secondly, before I go any further, I wanted to acknowledge, we received our first check from the Rotary, Casper Rotary tonight for $25,000. And if you folks remember last week, these are going to park enhancements, I believe, right? And so we want to thank our Rotary Club for this very kind donation for the city of Casper. And we accept that graciously on behalf of our constituents. So thank them. And then lastly, on the meeting follow-up, we were requested to, I was given a resolution that condemns the establishment of an abortion business, and it had a multitude of signatures on it. And we as a council need to discuss that, what we'd like to do with it. What I will tell you is, and I'm going to turn it over to the city attorney and he'll give you the legal guidance. But I can tell you that us passing any type of a resolution is moot. It means nothing. The state has already ruled that abortion is illegal in Wyoming. They are able to operate under a stay from one judge right now, and that will go through a trial and go all the way to the Supreme Court before we have any type of ruling. And in the meantime, they are legally allowed to be operating. So any resolution we would pass would mean absolutely nothing, because we certainly don't trump state or federal law. So with that said, Mr. City Attorney, I think you have some information for the council concerning this. Yes?
Yes, Mayor. Thank you, councilors. So I was asked to look into kind of the status of laws dealing with abortion in the state of Wyoming. Obviously, the narrative and the discussion around the topic changed fundamentally with the decision in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, whereby the U.S. Supreme Court returned the regulation of abortion back to the states. The state of Wyoming has passed, the legislature has passed 3 separate bills prohibiting abortion in the state of Wyoming. The first was House Enrolled Act 57, which was passed in the 2022 budget session, commonly referred to as the Trigger Act. What it, in a nutshell, said that if Roe v. Wade was repealed, a certain number of steps had to occur, and once it was certified, abortion then would, for all intents and purposes, be illegal in the state of Wyoming. This actually did occur and became the law of the land on July 27th of 2023. That same day, Teton County, Teton County Judge Melissa Owens issued a temporary injunction against the implementation of this abortion ban. The judge certified the question to the Wyoming Supreme Court, and in November of 2022, so yeah, I was actually certified July of 2022. I was a year off in my notes here. November 30th of 2022, the Wyoming Supreme Court declined to take the matter and remanded it back to the trial court. So the mayor is correct. There'll need to be a trial and a district court ruling on that matter. Subsequently, in the 2023 general session, 2 additional bills were passed, one prohibiting chemical abortion, and another which was referred to as Life as a Human Right bill was also passed. The chemical abortion ban was signed by the governor. The Life as a Human Right bill was not signed by the governor, but nonetheless became law. Within 5 days of their passage, the same judge in Teton County issued a temporary injunction on the enforcement of these 2 laws. Currently, these lawsuits are working their way through the legal system in Teton County. However, this judge rules it is highly likely that they will be appealed to the Wyoming Supreme Court. It's always a little bit of a crapshoot to say how long it will take for this to come to some resolution, but it's not out of the realm to say 12 to 24 months. And so until that time, basically, and currently, the laws are stayed and abortion is legal pursuant to the pre-existing laws of the state of Wyoming. Just one other tangential issue, Mayor and Council, there was some discussion of the necessity of this Wellspring business to obtain a business license from the city. The city does not issue general business licenses, so there is no license that has to be approved. Secondly, inspections are done by the State Department of Health. So the only really nexus that the city of Casper has had is to approve building plans like we would for any other business and enforcing our building code. So with that, that's kind of a brief overview, and I would certainly answer any other questions you might have.
So with that said, for public knowledge, the city has absolutely no standing for or against this clinic. We didn't issue it a business license. They are here operating legally through the state of Wyoming and the Public Health Department. So for this council to issue any type of a resolution would be, it would mean nothing, because we have a state that has more power than we do, and they've made a decision to allow them to be in business. And for now, that is the way it is. So I will open it up if there's any questions or comments, but I'm assuming this council is not interested in pursuing a resolution for no reason. Is that correct?
I'm not interested.
Anyone else? Okay, so, I mean, if it had an opportunity, I guess, to go somewhere, that'd be different, but it would have no standing if we were to do so. And so there's absolutely no point in doing it. So if you have questions, concerns, I met with some constituents today in my office who had questions and concerns. I would urge you to reach out to the Public Health Department. They are the ones that are in charge of, and the State Health Department are in charge of any inspections. Most of the questions you ask of me today would be answered by them. The city literally has no standing. So as long as they're a legally operating business, that's what the city cares about. So, okay, any other comments, questions on that one? All right, let's move on to Mr. City Manager, the Transit Electric Fleet Conversion Study Update, which I think was brought on by Mr. B.O.N.D. I saw an email from you, so I figured that's probably what brought this up.
Well, really, it was kind of a follow-up from the report we had in February or March.
Right.
And so that was a follow-up. The only question I'd asked about the hybrid option was
Gotcha.
the purpose of my email.
Okay, well, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, councilors, good evening. The report tonight is really that of an update with regard to this study. We're anticipating a final report sometime later this summer, perhaps July, wherein council will be given basically a roadmap as it relates to what it would take to electrify the transit fleet. There's been some question and concern whether or not this was a study for every piece of rolling stock that the city has in its arsenal of vehicles, if you will. This is really concerning transit, and that is it. Nor is this really a mandate. This is a study that provides a roadmap should council want to decide to take this route at some point in the future. This is not a mandate that the council is anticipating, or that this report makes the council do if accepted. So with those points clarified and hopeful questions answered, tonight we get the opportunity to see what the status is of this study. And for that, I'd like to turn the time over to Liz and her team and our consultants.
Ms. Becker?
Supervisor, the introductions.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Mayor, Council, Beth Andrews with the Casper Area MPO. So tonight we have Tyler Hopkins and Robert here from HDR. They were here in February to give you guys a preview of the study that we were going to do for the electrification of the transit fleet. That study pretty much are done with it. It enters public comment period tomorrow, which is a 30-day public comment period. After that public comment period, and then we'll go to the MPO policy committee for approval and it's pretty much final at that point. So we wanted to give you guys a preview of the findings of that study before that went out tomorrow for public comment. That will be available on the MPO's website and at the library, and we will be issuing a press release and a Facebook post tomorrow as well from the MPO. So I'm going to turn it over to Tyler.
Thank you very much. Gonna do a chair. Now that the heavy stuff's out of the way, let's talk about electric vehicles. Is the presentation up?
Does it not go up on the big board too, or?
It's just got it. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
All right. So we're gonna, like Mr. City Manager said, we're gonna talk about the Casper Area Transit Electric Fleet feasibility study. I think you made a really good point that this is not to dictate any sort of transition. It's the word feasibility is key. It's to tell whether it even makes sense. You made a point last time we were here, Mr. Mayor. If it doesn't make sense, we don't need to do it. And so that's exactly what we set out to find, not to push for any one direction, but to, see whether it made sense or not. Go ahead to the next slide. Good say. So last time we were here, we covered a couple of these first bullets, the project purpose and the context, the existing conditions review, and the market assessment. And that's about where we stopped last time. We started to talk about the energy modeling piece a little bit, but didn't have all those strategies written up, hadn't looked at the money side of things, and looking at workforce development, what it's going to take to train people on new vehicles. So that'll all be new, but I am going to do a quick run through of just a little bit of those first pieces for anybody who didn't hear it last time. Go ahead. So the purpose of this project was to analyze the existing fleet, which is all powered by gas or diesel. We want to outline the feasibility of a potential transition to BEVs, battery electric vehicles, somewhere in the future. We want to identify the costs that are associated with that. That's a big concern for a lot of folks. We want to identify the city, the MPO for future funding. We want to identify funding opportunities and prepare everyone to apply to those and receive them to help reduce costs for a transition. And we want to align with and support those 2023 to 2025 city council goals. And those are livability, sustainability, and citizen engagement. Go to the next slide. And then the project context, really there is a lot of funding out there right now. It increased a lot last year. There's more than $1.5 billion set aside every year from now through 2026. We know a little bit less about it then, so that's kind of part of the process here is, do you jump on it? Do you take advantage of that funding, or do you wait a little bit and, see how it shakes out? The other piece here in terms of context is that the transportation industry as a whole is shifting away from gas and towards electrified mobility and other alternative fuel vehicles. And there's also a lot of peer agencies. Casper Area Transit is the only agency here in the country that is currently looking at these things, having these same questions. How much is it going to cost? Does it even make sense for us? And so we're in line with what's happening. But so existing conditions and the market assessment. What we did is we evaluated the current fleet makeup and we reviewed the market for equivalent vehicles and what charging infrastructure is out there. Go ahead. So right now, the Casper Area Transit fleet has 22 vehicles in it. There's a deviated fixed route service, that's the Casper Area Link, and then the Casper Area Assist service is door to door. Those vehicles are anywhere from being delivered last year to 13 years old. And there are a few that are overdue for replacement already. And I think the big piece here is that these vehicles are traveling 150 to upwards of 200 miles a day. And I think on the next slide, we'll kind of show that a lot of these vehicles cannot go that far. Go ahead. I think the current range for a battery electric vehicle, that's a cutaway type vehicle that matches what the Transit has now, is only about 170 miles. So we're not hitting that 200. You know, maybe we can do an average day, maybe we can't do a worst case, at least based off that 170. There aren't any hydrogen fuel cell cutaway vehicles that are currently available. So that wasn't really a valid option at the moment. We also looked at the hybrid cutaway vehicle market based on some comments we received both in the last meeting we were at, the last working session we were at, and since then. One option we found is available on the market, but it is a repower, which means they take a vehicle that's powered by gas or diesel, rework it, and it has a battery and an electric powertrain in it, or a hybrid, for example. We talked to Casper Area Transit. There's a little bit of experience with those types of vehicles, and a little hit or miss in terms of kind of maintenance and reliability. So we didn't keep pursuing hybrids, but we did make sure we wanted to make sure we checked that box and you know, whether it made sense or not. And we don't think that right now that's a valid option. But so the last piece is the charging infrastructure. There are 3 types of chargers. We're really only looking at the one on the left and the one on the right, but you may have seen the one in the middle as well. We also call that pantograph charging. That's your overhead charging. But what we're going to talk about today really is the slower depot charging. We'll refer to that as level 2. That's typically going to charge, say if you had a standard vehicle, my Nissan Leaf charges in about 8 hours at a level 2 charger, but it is much smaller than a bus. The fast inductive charging is the other one we're going to look at, and that's really applicable when you're trying to charge a bus or top off a bus en route without having to go all the way back to the depot, plug in for a couple hours, and then head back out. Go ahead. So I think this is probably where we'll start some of the newer information that folks haven't heard yet. We conducted an energy analysis, and we used the data that we were provided by the MPO and by CAT to model service with potential battery electric vehicles. And that was considered both in terms of that slower depot charging that might be done overnight, and the on-route fast charging that could be done a couple times during the day. But so what we found really was that first we wanted to reduce the battery capacity. It would be nice to be able to use 100% of the battery capacity that you have. But in reality, you don't want to drop too low because you're inching towards running out of charge and stalling on the road. And you don't want to go too high. It just helps protect the longevity and the life of the battery to not kind of overcharge it often. The energy modeling, if what we find and what we built is that if one of the battery electric vehicles can't complete those 150 or those 200 miles, the modeling is going to suggest alternate strategies. And so that's really going to be expanding the fleet. So you're going to bring a bus back, or second bus is going to meet one out on the route, switch off, and that one's going to head back while the next one does the second half of the day, or on route fast charging. And that would keep the fleet size the same, but it's, you know, it can be pricier. It's a little more logistically challenging sometimes. Go ahead. So what we did find though, is that really none of the battery electric vehicles that are out there today, at least the cutaway vehicles, can do a complete day service. So I said before that the maximum range of these vehicles is around 170 miles, but also we cut 30% off. So we're really looking at 120, say, if you don't want to go over or under those thresholds. And that's below even a normal day where these buses are going 150 miles. So we're not seeing a way to start right now, buy 22 battery electric vehicles and everything works. We don't think that's the case. So what we would need is either to more than double the fleet size. It would go from 22 to 50 vehicles, which is quite a lot, or the on-route charging solution. One thing to note with the on-route charging is that a lot of these vehicles are also limited in how fast they can charge. They can only accept a certain power input. And so even if the fast charging appears feasible, if it needs to be at a higher power level than the vehicle can accept, it's still not feasible. Yeah, it's a little disappointing. Go ahead to the next slide. So talking about transition strategy. So keeping that in mind, we don't think it's feasible to have 22 battery electric vehicles tomorrow. What can we do? What might be feasible and what's worth considering on your end? So we looked at feasible ways to transition the fleet over time. And the options really were on-route fast charging, kind of operating. We'll get to a kind of pilot project to see how that looks in Casper, or delaying the transition and waiting for technology to catch up and prices to come down and things like that. Go ahead, kind of run through what those might be here. So for the near-term pilot project, what we're considering here, what we're not proposing to go do tomorrow, but just for you to consider as a feasible option, is to purchase 2 battery electric vehicles for delivery in a couple of years from now, 2027, and another one in 2029. And that will kind of allow those vehicles to be tested on the fixed route service, and then kind of moving into that assist door-to-door service. That would require one of those, if you remember the graphic all the way on the right, the inductive charging pads that are in the pavement. That would require one of those at the downtown transfer center. We're thinking that those buses could operate, for example, on the blue or the green line, so long as they pull into the same side on Beach Street. As long as they pull into the same side, they can both use that charger. So we don't need one charger per vehicle. We just need kind of those buses to trade off throughout the day. The on-route chargers, one thing to note, and I really like the next slide because it's a great graphic. They would not be visibly intrusive. Go ahead. The only piece that you're really going to see here is if you look for number 2, the charging cabinet behind. This is an example. It doesn't have to go exactly here. It just needs to be, I believe, within 300 feet of the charging pad. But behind the shelter might be a great example location for somewhere that would walk by and maybe not even notice this thing. Everything else, all the utilities are undergrounded downtown, so we're not looking at anything overhead at all. Go ahead. So planning for that pilot program, we say 2027, it's got to start a lot sooner than that. Part of that is just to go through the grant application process and get selected, and a large part of that is the lead time on these vehicles and the charging infrastructure. What we're seeing is essentially that it can be 2 years for some of these vehicles right now. You put an order in 2025 and you're going to get it in 2027. So that's why we say to kind of get started sooner rather than later. We would like I said, we would get those vehicles in 2027, and those would be tested and enter service then for that pilot program. If the pilot program was successful and on-route fast charging was something that really worked for the fleet, we would look at adding 3 more inductive chargers. One of those would be at the downtown transfer center on the opposite side of the street, and then the other 2 would be at transfer centers to the east and west. That way we can capture all 6 bus routes. And it would also require more of the overnight chargers at the bus depot. We did talk to Rocky Mountain Power, and they let us know that there is ample power supply at all of those locations. So we don't think that it's an issue to add that load to the grid or anything like that. But thank you. So a couple opportunities and risks with this pilot program, and then we'll go ahead and talk about what it looks like to just delay the transition entirely. Some opportunities are gaining that experience with battery electric vehicles before you commit to a full transition, and the charging infrastructure. Testing that charging technology, those wireless chargers and these buses against local conditions is also a really great thing. We've got cold weather, we've got a lot of terrain, we've got long routes and long days. These buses operate for 12 to 14 hours a day. So testing this technology against all of that, it's an opportunity to further feel out kind of the feasibility of this. It would allow the funding that's out there to be leveraged while it's confirmed and guaranteed. And also it could start to give an opportunity to measure some of the reductions we expect in operations and maintenance costs. Some risks though, there's higher upfront capital costs to install those chargers and buy those buses upfront. Of course, some of that federal funding could help to reduce that a little bit. It's a relatively new technology, especially the charging infrastructure, that inductive charger. And this is a more remote area. What we find is that these charger manufacturers have employees scattered around the country, but they might be in Denver or they might be in Minneapolis. They might not be in Casper proper, and it might take a little while for them to come out if those chargers have a problem. And if they have a problem and the buses can't charge, your service starts to get impacted. So that's the risk of this. There might need to be some service changes. That's feasible, but certainly a risk that you have to just put some effort into that. That local OEM support, original equipment manufacturer, is lacking. And one last piece is that we say obsolete. It's not that you couldn't use that on-route charger if the slower chargers became feasible. It's still there. It's still resilient. But you might come to that feeling of, well, why'd we do it? If the technology was going to pick up the pace in 5 years, did we make the right decision? So just making sure that, that's in everyone's minds. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So in terms of delaying the transition, like I said, right now, we don't think that it's feasible to rely totally on that level 2 depot charging. So we looked at delaying it until certain market indicators have been met. And so that's going to be the charge speed improvements, the battery capacity of these vehicles and their driving range, and the vehicle purchase price. So when they can accept a high enough charge from that on-route charger to actually be able to make it through a shift, the whole fleet might be able to be transitioned using fast charging. Or if those vehicles can make it 250 miles in a day, you might be able to just charge them overnight. And the vehicle purchase prices are very simply a financial indicator. It's, folks don't want to necessarily spend twice as much to replace their fleet vehicles if they don't have to. Go ahead to the next slide. But these things really can be met, kind of a combination of these could be met. I'm skipping to the bottom bullet here, but incremental increases in, say, driving range could reduce the power that you need at that on-route charger. Maybe the vehicles are feasible sooner because they go further and can charge faster, but both of those benchmarks are fully met. Just kind of a combination of those things might come into play that makes it feasible. But what we think is that delaying the transition, that's going to get you lower vehicle purchase prices, and you're going to leverage those improvements in technology. One thing to note is that even if the purchase prices do decrease, the other things still need to be true. Just because it costs the same as a gas vehicle doesn't mean that it's going to work unless, it's confirmed that it's going to work and go that many miles without dying. Go ahead to the next slide. So moving from that, so those are our 2 strategies. And so now we move into what does it cost? And this is maybe everyone's favorite part or maybe the scariest part. So we considered a baseline scenario, and that's where you keep operating as you do today, gasoline vehicles, diesel vehicles, you replace them as you planned on replacing them before electric vehicles even existed, just to get an idea of what that would cost so that we can compare it to electric vehicles. And then we also looked at, again, the level 2 depot charging versus the on-route fast charging. So in that baseline scenario, we started with in that baseline scenario, we started with a standard inflation rate and also a cost decrease for the battery electric vehicles. Like I said before, on a previous slide, we think that around 2029 or so, those vehicles should start to cost right around the same amount. That year has, it kind of constantly changes. It could get pulled up a year, it could get pushed back too. It's a projection, not a total fact. But we do think that around 2029 into the turn of the decade, that's when that would happen. The level 2 and the wireless inductive fast chargers, those are about $10,000 versus $400,000. To put that in perspective, kind of that order of magnitude there. And obviously, local conditions, the need to redo curbs and stuff like that can always play into it, but that's kind of your average. Jumping back up to the top really quick, I do want to touch on the fact that the capital costs, like I said, are going to be higher upfront. And I think we all know electric vehicles are a little more expensive. The benefit they do bring is that you do not have to pay as much to operate and maintain them. Electricity is way cheaper than fuel, and they don't have as many moving parts. The brake pads last longer. There's a lot of things that go into savings there. It can be up to 40% with passenger vehicles. It's a little bit less with some of these larger vehicles, and there's a little bit less data on it. But there is certainly the opportunity to save money there. Go ahead to the next slide. So here we go, for the baseline scenario, this reflects Casper Area Transit maintaining that current fleet. It includes 2 replacement cycles. All of these are gonna include 2. So you're not just looking at what does it cost to go replace the fleet now. You're also looking at when that set of fleet vehicles needs to get replaced, what does it cost then also? So over the next 15 to 20 years, what's your total cost, including every time you need to replace these vehicles, which I believe is every 7 to 8 years. Those overdue vehicles I mentioned before, we kind of spread them out. Those would be replaced by 2027, and then you really get started on the vehicles that are due after then. And what we see is that the total cost of ownership over that 17-year period is about just under $30 million. So keep that in mind as we go through the next 3. And what those changes look like in cost. Go ahead. So the first kind of transition alternative I'll cover is the one we've already kind of written off as infeasible, and that's going out there and doing it tomorrow. Like I said, 50 vehicles, 50 chargers. That's a lot of operational changes. There's logistical concerns. You probably need to rebuild the whole bus garage or the parking lot. But there's a lot that's going to go into accommodating 28 extra vehicles. We do return back to 22 vehicles in the future, assuming that technology does improve. But what you've done is put 50 chargers in, and now at some point you only have 22 vehicles and you've got 50 chargers that you don't need 28 of. But so really what we end up with, I think this is the kicker, is a $47.5 million price tag. That is almost $20 million more than what we saw before. Don't get too afraid. I've got better news on the next couple slides, but go ahead to the next one. This is by far the most expensive, which makes sense. It's 50 vehicle purchases and charging infrastructure and everything that goes into it. Delaying the transition though. So assuming that in the future you can rely on that slower charging, we just kind of waited out until that happens. We started by saying you keep buying your gasoline and diesel vehicles now, and then when those are due the next time, that's when you're going to start buying electric vehicles. And so if you follow that, that puts you in about 2032. So you've got almost 10 years for that technology to improve, the costs to come down, all that good stuff. So we assume that we keep it at 22 vehicles at that point. They can all go far enough. They can all charge fast enough, what have you. To note, that is predicated on those improvements. It could improve really fast and you could be ready to go in 2030, or it could improve slower and you might wait until 2035. We can assume that the technology will be there. We think it will be. We just don't know for absolute certain. But here, the total cost of ownership for this is $27.5 million. So we're actually almost 10% lower than operating that gas and diesel fleet. And that's assuming that, you wait it out until the purchase prices come down. And then from there on out, you're going to save a lot in operations and maintenance, and you end up at that lower cost overall. Go ahead to the next slide. And then the last one is going to be that fast charging near-term pilot project. Like I said, you make kind of your vehicle purchases up front. You've got 2 in 2024 and another one later on for the assist vehicle. We have that 1 on-route fast charger and 3 slower chargers at the depot. And then the full fleet transition, assuming that works out, begins again in 2032 with that second cycle, just like the last one. The total cost of ownership here is really almost spot on with the gasoline and diesel powered fleet. We are negative 0.5% off. I think we're about $500,000 or so. So again, these last 2 are financially feasible options to start transitioning the fleet, or wait and start later. Go ahead. So just to lay out really quick, just what this looks like over time. You're incurring incremental costs. You're not spending $47.5 million tomorrow, but you can see how that top one really breaks away. Especially when you have to start buying those vehicles. All of those blue bars are a lot taller because you're buying double. Whereas the others, you can actually see the trade-off between the 2 bottom lines. You can see where that trade-off happens right around 2037, where those operations and maintenance savings start to outweigh what you paid for the vehicles. Go ahead to the next slide. So I think this just sums up everything. I think I've said most of it. We need battery technology to improve if you're gonna rely on level 2 charging and save some of that money. We do think that financially feasible options are the last 2 that we presented. in terms of operating a pilot project or delaying the transition. And we do see that we're going to start to outweigh the capital costs with those operations and maintenance savings. Go ahead. Then I think this last section, we'll touch on workforce development a little bit. I mentioned funding earlier. I should say 5% of that Federal Transit Administration funding is dedicated to workforce development. That is a huge component of this. We're introducing a brand new technology to people who may have never touched it in their entire lives. And so we want to make sure that we're not leaving folks behind when we do this. That's always a concern. So we looked at the existing workforce development practices in the group and identified what training needs there would be to transition the fleet. And then we looked at a sample training curriculum as well. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So currently, there's operations support, bus operators, maintenance, and maintenance support and maintenance personnel. So kind of 4 categories of maintenance staff and bus operators. They're all going to need to be trained on various aspects here. There's not really a plan to grow the workforce right now. The only caveat would be if you chose to buy 50 vehicles, but you probably couldn't keep the same number of maintenance folks if you add 28 vehicles to their workload. So we think there would probably be the need for another 4 maintenance staff and at least 1 more bus operator. We do recommend kind of a train the trainer model where someone goes, receives that training and is ready to come back and train new hires or retrain folks who need to be brought up to speed. We think that works really well and it's efficient. You don't have to send 20 people to a training, every couple of years. And we do want to make sure that training is coordinated with local first responders in case there are any issues with those vehicles when they're out and about. But to the next slide. So for the bus operators, the first thing that they're going to need to know is really just vehicle familiarization. You can drive these things more efficiently and really get some of that range back if you kind of drive them a little differently than a gasoline vehicle because of that regenerative braking. They also need to know the charging protocols if they're plugging them in at the depot or where to pull onto that on-route charger. And then they need to just understand high voltage safety as well. Go ahead to the next slide. And then the maintenance personnel, they're also going to need to be familiarized with the vehicles a little bit more detailed. They need to know how to actually work with these systems. They need to know how to take care of them. They also need that high voltage safety. The thing here, there's no high voltage certified personnel in the staff right now. That's something that could be pursued, or there are high voltage certified mechanics in Casper. That some of those existing relationships can be used to have that work done by them. And then the last piece is going to be maintaining that charging infrastructure, both the stuff at the depot and en route. Go ahead. I think that about wraps it up. So just in conclusion, an immediate transition, we do not think that it is financially or logistically feasible. It would cost some combination of costing a lot and rebuilding a lot. We do see that those feasible paths forward are that pilot program, if that's something that catches folks' interest, or delaying the start of the transition and just waiting out that technology and those purchase prices. We do think that it'll be more cost effective if you do go the latter route. We talked about the cost being about 8% lower. We do think that waiting it out is a little bit cheaper. But if you want to make a move sooner and leverage some of that available funding, the pilot program is the way to go. It's a matter of what the priorities are. Do you have a real desire to start now? That's your option. If you don't, it might be worth delaying the transition. And the last piece really is that the crux of this plan is that the transit agency is prepared. They're capable of applying for funding now. This plan is required to apply for that funding in the first place. Whether you do or not, the plan is there for if and when you're ready. I think with that, I'm just about done. Any comments or questions?
Yes. Mr. Gamros.
Thank you, Mayor. I got a couple if you don't mind. Heads up.
Yeah.
Sorry, what's your name? Tyler. Tyler. Thanks, Tyler. Appreciate all the information. I'm not somebody that considers myself to have allegiances one way or another. I think it's a shame that people get so tribalistic on topics such as this, because I think our role in city council should just be focused on cost savings to the city, efficiencies, and how we get the most bang for our buck using our funding. That said, I appreciate all the information. I don't think it provides real compelling reasons to make the switch. But I do have a couple questions for you. The federal funding that's currently available. Do you have any indication how much of the projects that you laid out, how much that federal funding would cover? Is it 100%? Is it 50? Is it 25?
About 7%.
Okay, so, okay, so the city would need to come up with about 30% of that. I was curious, the inductive charging, because it sounded like that's kind of the most, due to the range issue. Kind of curious, the inductive charging, how long does it take to charge a bus up? My guess is that would have an impact on routes. I mean, my guess it's not a 5-minute ordeal, so.
So I didn't get into the super weeds of it, but I'll try to give an overview. We analyzed what the power output, what the power level would be needed to have that bus say, hold on to it for 10 minutes at the end of every hour. They show back up at the downtown transfer center once every hour. Sometimes it's 5 minutes early, sometimes it's 10, and sometimes they might be 2 minutes late. So there's some uncertainty there as well. But what we wanted to figure out was you only had 10 minutes to top off every hour or two. What power do you need to get there? And that's how we came to that conclusion that the vehicles can't accept that level of power that they would need. If you go up to say 250 kilowatts, which is getting close to the highest low right now, maybe you can't get that top off in 10 minutes. It won't fill it up, but it'll get you to the next one, and it'll get you back to the depot at the end of the night. But at like 80 kilowatts, which is what these vehicles can accept, they would need to sit there for a half hour. So that's why we kind of say on the program, because we know that a couple vehicles are capable of making it. So those would be the ones that you would test while the rest of the technology kind of catches up.
Thank you. One last, and then I'll let my colleagues speak. You mentioned battery preservation best practices reduces the range about 30% because you don't want to go below that. I think it was 20% or above that, like 80, 90%. Could you speak to what cold weather does to the range? I was doing some independent research while you were talking. I hope you don't mind. But it looks like it's probably about another 30% hit when you're in cold weather and drawing the heat and everything like that. Do you, in your research, did you find how cold weather affects range as well?
Yeah, cold weather, especially for these cutaways and the buses, is gonna reduce that range. I don't know if there's a general percent. That we have 30% for cutaways, about 30% reduction. So that's something that energy modeling, when we take that 30% reduction, we say 70% is the useful battery capacity. You know, we're thinking, okay, so on a normal day, but it's cold weather, for example, that kind of lines up as well, and it's not feasible.
Thank you.
I have one question, one comment. My first question would be the thing that they pull onto on the road. What happens in the wintertime when that's covered with snow and ice? Does it still transmit through the snow and ice to charge the bus? Yeah.
It's got a 12-inch. It shoot 12 inches through water or snow.
Gotcha. And then my comment would be, I'm not tribalistic on electric, gas, or diesel. It doesn't. I mean, I'm indifferent, I guess, until we start talking about the very taxes that this state collects. The money that we make primarily in the state of Wyoming is off of our natural resources, our oil, our gas, and our coal. So I have a really hard time having somebody in Washington, D.C. dangle dollars in front of me to buy an electric bus to compete with our very industry that puts money in our pockets in the state of Wyoming and the city of Casper. So I, for one, will never be for bringing electric buses here, not because I'm against electricity, but because oil and gas is what pays our bills here. And so it makes absolutely no sense to slap the one industry in the face that funds us entirely, almost. So anybody else have any questions, comments?
Bruce.
Sure.
So not to beat a dead horse, but I do have some other questions about hybrid.
Sure.
Number one, if you mentioned that right now the technology for hybrid is just unreliable, and it's a total conversion, kind of maybe sounds cost prohibitive perhaps, and that the technology just isn't there yet so my first question is about, are there other municipalities perhaps that you're aware of that have done that type of work, done some early use of that? And I mean, to me, there's just all kinds of reasons why a hybrid, not only for the reasons Bruce mentioned, it's, just in the community we live, but also just in terms of the weather and the durability of them compared to all electric. I think there's just lots of reasons to do it. And given the fact that, if we're 10 years or more out on a conversion because of the electric vehicle technology evolving as well, what's to say the hybrid technology won't evolve, at the same rate and improve within either before or at least by the end of that same time period.
Yeah, and that's a great point. The one thing I think is right now with the market, there isn't much of a market to expand hybrid cutaways. There's not really demand for it, and so manufacturers aren't going that route.
Even in northern cities.
Yeah, what we're really doing is going to, well, I'm not a manufacturer, but going towards those battery electric vehicles. And I think your runner up behind that is probably hydrogen, which is why we did try to look for those options as well and couldn't find any. But we don't think that, at least right now, we don't see a forecast where there are more hybrid options getting added or a lot of development in that technology. A lot of those resources are being given to electric buses.
Councilor Ingebretson.
I'm just trying to get my head around a little bit of the maintenance. How much does a battery replacement cost?
Number?
New vehicles are around 20 to 25. I would assume a bus would be more.
Yeah, they sell them in blocks of energy, so they're probably gonna run on that vehicle. Probably around 55, 60 grand a piece.
And then how often do they have to be replaced?
On those vehicles, they should last like, they're 6 to 7 year vehicles. So they should last 6 to 7 years with battery packs.
Yeah, with the current replacement schedule that's followed by the agency, those vehicles get replaced every 7 years, so the vehicle should outlast the battery, essentially. For what's considered the useful lifespan of the vehicle.
Okay, anyone else? Kyle?
Thanks. I guess I would just like to push back a little bit on the idea that it'd be a slap in the face to the fossil fuel industry. The inductive chargers would be drawing upon the electricity grid that's at least currently provided by a coal-powered power plant. And so, it's still, the fossil fuels still play an integral role in, these buses doing their gig. Again, I just don't think doesn't sound like we're there. It sounds like the range would need to triple essentially before it's even something that we can consider. And I don't know if that's going to be done here in the next year. I guess we'll see. You never know. Some of this technology advances at an exponential pace, and maybe a year or two from now, we got very different numbers in front of us. But regardless, I do appreciate all the work you put into it. Like I said, I don't have allegiances. I'm just a very curious person. More information is always better. Knowledge is power. And so I appreciate the information. I was curious if you might provide your candid perspective. I don't know many people with electric vehicles. As you need some leaf pulling up. What's your experience been like with that, if you don't mind?
I love it, but I want something that goes further.
Okay.
Which might be the theme of this whole thing.
All right.
No, I do. I really enjoy driving it, mostly because it's silent and takes off very fast. But it goes 150 miles, and I'm not too frequent of a driver. I live in Denver. I don't drive that often, but when I need to go to the airport or something, it's like my battery's half gone already. So the range is my biggest anxiety about it, and I've started kind of looking for options that might go a little further myself.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you very much. That was a very informed report. We certainly appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you all for your time.
Okay, Mr. City Manager, Casper Mountain Property Easement Request.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You will see here soon an exhibit that essentially captures what it is that's being requested of the city. Essentially, the idea is that a private landowner would like to gain access through a corner of city-owned property up on Casper Mountain toward the east end of the city's holdings, wherein that would exist so that the adjacent property owner would be able to legally access their property. Pursuant to said request, council's ask of staff's ask of council tonight is really simply this: whether or not you'd be interested in us entertaining negotiations with said property owner and potentially bringing a proposal forward that would account for the city's costs and so forth to provide that access to the property in question. And so with that, Mr. Mayor, we do have some folks here tonight that are more familiar with this request than I. Certainly, from Liz's team, certainly the attorney has looked into this matter as well. If council is comfortable with staff engaging this conversation further, your memo includes a number of questions that we want to nail down so that indeed an agreement that would come thereafter would be complete and thorough and hopefully considers all the issues and matters that this type of request of the city would need to include.
As you wish.
All right, and so if I could maybe turn some time over to Mr. Collins and or Ms. Becker, and then of course the city attorney if you so desire.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, councilors, I attend, so I'll take the lead on this. But I think the city manager Napier pretty much summed it up. The city owns 120 acres up on the east end of Casper Mountain. There's a contiguous landowner that is landlocked, and he has requested a right-of-way or an easement through the city-owned property. Wyoming statute does provide a process through district court if we were unwilling to entertain these negotiations, that he could petition the court for a private road access. And the memo kind of outlined some of the things that would occur, that there would be viewers and appraisers appointed. They would mark out the private road. The proposed road should be the most convenient. As you can see on the map, I think the dotted line shows the most direct route from a public road to Mr. McDaniel's parcel, and that is through the city property. So if it is council's pleasure, I would work with Mr. Collins to enter into negotiations with the landowner. Obviously, all costs we would want to see borne by the landowner, including surveying costs and then compensation for the right of way if we reach agreement. So I guess with that, I would answer any questions that the council might have.
Carter, what do we currently use that land for?
Mr. Mayor, councilors, this is a piece of land that is consistent and conterminous with a huge amount of acreage that the city has currently. A lot of the land is used with regard to trails and access points that have been developed over the years. This is far enough east that it isn't in the center of all the trail activity, but nonetheless, we do have a lot of recreational use in the area. But I'm not aware of much more practical use than that.
So we don't see any real inhibition for the city to grant that.
No, I wouldn't say so.
Go ahead, Jen.
How does he get to it now?
Mayor, councilor, so it's a little unclear. I was hoping to have some clarification. I'm not sure if he owns it or is looking to purchase it. But either way, I don't think that he is accessing it. There's no legally enforceable access to our knowledge currently in existence.
Lisa?
Right.
Sorry, Ray, I'll get you. That's all right, go ahead. Lisa, go ahead.
I suppose, because he purchased a landlocked property. He purchased it like that. So I guess in my mind, if he's asking the city to do something for him, then the burden of cost should fall 100% onto him. That the city should not have to come out of pocket a dime. If we're willing to look at giving him an easement, he should have to pay for all of it.
Which is what you said, correct?
Mayor, Councilor, that's correct. I agree 100%. And in addition, not only should the cost come out of pocket, but we should be compensated for the loss of use of whatever easement is provided. So it certainly, just to be clear, we would not be just granting him gratis access across city land. We would receive some compensation for it, certainly.
Mr. Ray?
So it sounds like to me that there's obviously a statute that's built in. If we deny it, that he could go through this process, then it would get out of our hands, right, technically. And then we would end up having to deal with whatever the state statute requires. So I would just suppose it would be my feelings that we'd rather negotiate around this and work with this person than having to go through the whole state statute. I think it's much more of a better process for us to be involved in it and get it done and do that. That's my thought.
Agreed.
Thanks, Bruce. And I wouldn't disagree with Ray. My question's kind of an aside. I apologize, I'm ignorant. I lack the historical context. What is the rationale for the city owning much land up there other than maybe where Hogadon resides? One of our county commissioners had asked me the question, why there isn't some sort of land transfer, because I believe the county owns most of the land up there. And so I'm just curious, for what reasons does City of Casper have land up there? And is there any sort of master plan or future vision for what we do with the land that we do have?
Mr. Mayor, Counselor, I've asked myself that question a number of times as well. And the reality is, I think there is a great deal of that that's come as a result of the city acquiring Hogadon back in the late 70s and real early 80s. We've also acquired a number of pieces from other private properties over the years that has sort of built that block of ownership over time. Without a doubt, there is interest in having conversations with the county to try to consolidate use and ownership a little more succinctly, so that indeed each of our efforts can be furthered as much as possible. But to give you a definitive, singular reason that we have this block of land, the truth is it's a number and myriad of ownership issues over the years that certainly have culminated for decades to bring us to where we're at right now.
Mayor, if I might just add, Counselor, I don't think it's correct necessarily that the county owns more land than the city, because even the Nordic Trail system by Athlon, those are all city-owned properties that the county operates through agreement. So my recollection, having worked this previously, is that the city owns at least as much or more land on the top of the mountain.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Questions? Well, we need direction, so I guess we can go one of two ways. We can deny our staff the ability to go forward, and if we do so, we'll end up in district court anyway, or we can be good neighbors and offer him access to his landlocked land, which we don't even know if he's actually purchased the land yet. And give him the ability to access his ground with not only no cost to us, but actually even possibly for a little bit of recourse for use of that. So what be your pleasure, sir?
I just want to comment that I meant to say that I think the questions that are generated on the memo are excellent. And I think those, if staff could get those questions answered, and would that come back to council?
Well, absolutely.
And before it, so I think that would give us more information
Sure.
to make a good.
So is everybody okay with giving staff the permission to pursue? Thumbs, please. Okay, very good. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Eric, for the information. Let's move on to the fiscal year 2023 budget amendment number 3. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councilors. You are used to the notion of why we are here by now. You've been through a number of amendments as well as a number of budget exercises and so on. The impetus as to why we're here is to simply reconcile the reality of what we're facing at this point in the fiscal year to the dollars and expenses and so on that are occurring compared to what we budgeted for a number of months ago. This will be one of your final amendments for the current fiscal year. This is a fiscal year 23 amendment that we're asking for. You can see that the vast majority of the adjustments that we need to make are with regard to moving money around to the various funds within the city's portfolio. You'll recall during our budget discussion, we had a real similar conversation about transfers. When you're moving money out of one fund into another, it looks and acts like an expense and a revenue between those two funds. And so the necessity for creating an amendment to accommodate that movement is why you're seeing a lot of these entries. We also do, however, have some increased expenses that we need to account for as well. And you've heard about a number of these. You're aware of some of these. Some of these may be new to you. And for those reasons, and even if you wanted to go over some of the other ones that we've talked about before, that's why we're here tonight, to go through that information, to go through your questions, and to try to get into a little more detail than your memo often allows. Jill and her team are available to go through that with you tonight to whatever detail you'd like. We are talking about a $23 million amendment to, essentially wrap up the year, even though we generally will have one more after this, to really tie up the loose ends before we get into fiscal year 24. A lot of these projects and so forth are projects that you weighed in on, and undoubtedly movement of these dollars are to accommodate those projects as well. We even have an unappropriation section, you'll notice in your memo, that deals with some other costs that came in different than we thought, in some cases even a reduction in cost. Be that as it may, as I mentioned, we're here to answer your questions, provide additional detail. If there's homework we need to build into the formal consideration for you here in the coming week or two, we'd be happy to go forward and do that as well.
Questions? Mr. Damroth.
Thank you, Bruce. I just had one, let me see if I can find exactly where it was at. I was mostly interested in the, I apologize, you might have to help me figure out, oh, no, it's under new appropriations. 470,000 related to increased prisoner care costs in the police department, funded by the general fund. I was curious, what is our budget for incarceration? I guess that's a good place to start.
Sure, no problem. Mr. Mayor, maybe I'll take a crack at that, Counselor, and then Chief, if you want to fill in any of those blanks, feel free to do so if it pleases the council. We generally will have in excess of $1 million in terms of a budget for prisoner care. And typically what that means is when our municipal court sends someone to jail for whatever reason, it could be a whole variety of reasons, as you know, we get charged by the county for those daily rates. And I think the daily rate at this point in time is upwards of $143, $145 a night to care for those prisoners, if you will. There are times where the judge has to send a person back for reoffense or whatever. And without a doubt, our police department is arresting a lot of folks as well. Arrests are up. And so oftentimes it becomes a real challenge to understand what we should set aside each year to try to balance the number of arrests with the degree of compliance from those who often find themselves in jail. But you can expect we're going to spend $1 million a year on prisoner care. In this particular year, we've had a more aggressive experience with folks ending up in jail through our municipal court, and we're suggesting that we need $470,000 additionally to reconcile that activity for what we budgeted. And that's the long and short of it. Mr. Mayor, if you'd like to have more detail from the chief, we can certainly do that.
Thank you. I don't want to put the chief on the spot. Maybe, it'd be best to allow him some time to, prep himself to speak about this further, but I was, meeting with a couple of folks this morning, social service providers about, homelessness. I'm talking about it multiple times a week. It's consuming a lot of my time, these days, but, they had an example of a gentleman that was, jailed for, being trespassed from a property. I think he spent 6 months in jail, again at $145 a night. Got out and he had a $50 municipal fee. Gentleman, at least from what I was told, doesn't really have the capacity to work or earn a living. And so I was worried that we would send him back to jail again at $145 a night. And over the course of a year, we're probably spending $20,000 to incarcerate this one guy for things like trespassing. And so I'm just, my line of inquiry is in the pursuit of if there's things that we can be doing better. That's so much money, $1.5 million essentially, it sounds like this last fiscal year. It just makes me wonder if we can realize cost savings by spending that money in different ways and being a little bit more creative in our approach. Chief, if you have anything to add, I'm happy to hear from you. But again, I don't want you to feel like I'm, putting you on the spot and that you don't have time to prepare. But that's what I'm curious about is, man, there's got to be some potential to be a little more creative and reduce those costs by keeping some of these folks out of jail or minimizing the time that they're in jail.
Mayor, councilors, that's not an easy topic that you're bringing up. So I just want to make sure that we're setting the record straight. We do adequately or do our best to attempt to budget for what we think the next calendar year is going to do. We were, in terms of arrests and detainments, we were adjusting coming out of the COVID years. However, the rate of crime has really been accelerating recently. And so arrests were up during this calendar year, year to date, which is still part of the current fiscal year. Arrests are up 27%. So right across the board, you're going to be looking at an increase in that budget just from the realities of responding to the crime wave. So to be abundantly clear, the budget, I'm going from memory, the budget was roughly $1.4 million for incarceration. We're asking for an additional $480,000 because that's what we think is we're going to end up this year. When it comes to how we go about determining what is the best use of this money, without question, that is an ongoing, efficiently working partnership between us and the municipal court. There are persons who the municipal court has, they're working with a goal in mind. There are persons that are chronic offenders who pretty much thumb their nose at the system, and the judge is trying to work with them to achieve a better outcome. But we are acutely aware of the expenses associated with this. As you may recall from a recent presentation, our citations in lieu of arrest are also up 25% in an effort to reduce the expenses to the city. What I would submit to you is that the results of this is not due to targeting, some homeless populations or things like that. What you're seeing is the direct result of crime. Crime is up. The officers are actively engaged in helping reduce crime in our community. And this is the cost of doing business when it comes to public safety.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Ray?
Yeah, so it's kind of in conjunction with what Kyle was talking about. I mean, I think community-wide, we're currently trying to work on that, and the Casper Police Department has been actively involved, as the Sheriff's Department, within the sequential intercept model work. And this is related to exactly that. And we're trying to figure out ways in order for us to deal with criminal justice and dealing with that and working with the judges, working with the police. This is ongoing work that's happening right now in our community, and it's incredible work. that is being done by many stakeholders in partnership with the police department, the sheriff's department, and many others within that. So we're actively working on that. We're trying to figure out ways to slow down the incarceration rates. There's a great deal, and the chief can probably talk more about this. There's a great deal of recidivism of people going through the system. There's been investment within a community case manager to work with people coming out of incarceration to help through that. And so there's efforts right now going through it. And I think it's an opportunity for us to look at how we can partner with the police to do that and with the law enforcement. And the chief is right. The criminal incarceration rates have skyrocketed because of those reasons. And so we're in this in the long haul being able to do that. So just wanted to put that out there. And I know Kyle knows a little bit about the work that we're doing as well. He's been to some of our sequential intercept meetings that we've been working on. In conjunction with that, Letitia has been coming to those meetings. We're on par right now to be meeting with the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court from Wyoming to meet with us next month to start talking about diversion processes. So this is ongoing work that's happening right now on the ground with partnership and stakeholders.
Any other questions, not just concerning this, but on the budget amendment itself? There's a lot in there. If you guys looked at it, it's pretty involved, and it's a substantial amount of money. So. Well, it looks like everybody that read their memo seems to be good with what you got going on there. So.
Mayor,
Sure.
I do have one question. Is there like a public comment period or a public hearing that are held for the city budget? Just a point of information.
For the amendment, it'll be brought to us in a public consent resolution, I'm assuming.
And for the overall budget, I guess is also.
The overall budget will be adopted in June. Is it next week?
And is there a public comment? Is that out for public comment now or? is
Well,
there a
during
hearing?
public comment, anybody can come and talk to us anytime they want.
Sure,
So
sure.
about
Okay.
during public comment.
Okay,
So during regular city council meetings.
okay.
That's always open and available for any topic that the public wants to engage the council in, certainly.
But not a specific hearing for the,
Excuse me?
not a specific hearing for the budget.
That is correct,
Okay, thank you.
sir.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Bond will be happy to know that we have a public hearing for both items scheduled.
Oh, good.
Okay.
And so that'll be next week
At the
council meeting, which will be right here. Yeah.
On the 20th,
And we are, of course, open to comment, as you mentioned, at any time via email and general citizen guidance at any point. So, but without a doubt, the statutory deadline to pass the budget for fiscal year 24 is Tuesday night.
Well, I will tell you, I'm extremely proud of the budget that was brought to us. Not only is it balanced, it only had an increase of 3%. And considering inflation right now, our staff did a fantastic job with our budget. We do have a lot of capital projects coming up, so that makes it look enormous, but the actual budget itself, 3% in this day and age is pretty good. So they did a really good job, and so make sure we will be voting on that next week. So if you have any questions concerning the budget coming up, that is in your packet, and that'll be the time to do it because we'll be adopting that next Tuesday night. Okay. Any other questions concerning this topic? All right, very good. I'm going to switch gears just for 1 second. I wanted to recognize Mr. Beamer. This is your last council meeting with us. My suggestion was for us to set up a paddle wheel and send you through it. And then I said, well, how about I jump on him, throw him on the ground, and we all give him noogies. And I asked Carter if I could get in trouble for that. And he said, no, not at all. So I don't know if he was being sarcastic or not, but then the other thing I remembered is you're also a man and you probably throw me on the ground. So I decided I wouldn't do that. But I will tell you, for me personally, I'm going to miss our interactions. The city is gonna miss you greatly. You've done such a great job in your position for the city of Casper, and you're gonna be sorely missed. I know we haven't, in fact, we haven't even been able to find anybody to replace you as of yet, Drew. So, I mean, those are big shoes, seriously. So, I just wanted to let you know we're gonna miss you, and I wish you well in your retirement.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Is that warrant applause or?
Pardon? You're welcome. Okay, moving on. Public officer training. This is information only. Looks like about 5 minutes are set up for you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Some of you have heard about this, maybe all of you even, that this was imminent and upcoming. We even had one who's gone through a lot of it already, by virtue of the WAM conference this past week. Public officer training is actually training that, elected officials at the local level will need to go through. I will need to go through it as well, right alongside you. Pursuant to some new statutes that have come out recently that gives councils like yourself a year to get trained starting July 1. That training is directed by the Department of Audit and Revenue at the state of Wyoming. We are looking into those stopping points that each of those trainings need to include so that hopefully we can conduct that training on the state's behalf through Jill's office over the next year and get everybody in this room certified with regard to the guidance of the new statutes in this regard. There are a number of things that undoubtedly you're going to be familiar with already, just by virtue of the fact that you've been making decisions along these lines. But the fact that you are decision makers is really what qualifies you to be a part of this training requirement on behalf of the city of Casper. We wanted to give you that heads up and have you be aware of that, in that I wanted you to know that we're trying to do that for you. If in fact the state for whatever reason can't certify our syllabus and training goals that we have in mind, we will need to go through the state to make that training happen. I don't see that being a problem necessarily, but indeed, the state retains that authority, if you will, to give us the nod or not to provide that training. Jill has been working very hard on this, as you might imagine, and as you can tell in the memo. If you have any questions for Jill or myself this evening, that's why we're here. And so if I could, Mr. Mayor, turn that time over to you for questions or for additional information from Jill.
Lisa?
I'd like to say that I am certified. And if you guys have the opportunity to take advantage of 5 hours, I would say go for it, because I was in there for 13 and a half hours and it was painful. So if you can get certified in 5 hours, I would say do it. But it was overall a good class, because then they said that if you're in office, you get certified and then you get out of office and then later on decide to run again for something completely different, you're still certified. It just kind of just keeps with you for forever. So.
Well, just for the record, it is mandated. We have to do it. So we don't have a choice. So. Any questions, comments, concerns? All right. Okay, let's move on. I'm assuming we'll just have one big class and get everybody in there and have lunch and get it done.
Mr. Mayor, to me, that would be ideal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good, sir. Let's go on to I-25 Casper marginal enhancements with YDOT, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councilors. Unsurprising probably to all of you, we have gotten bids back with regard to the work that this project is meant to cover. And the costs have come in quite a bit more substantial than what we had budgeted. You know that the parts that the city of Casper is responsible for is in partnership with the state of Wyoming, but only covers a certain amount of funding. We try to leverage the dollars that they make available, and that amount is less than $400,000 for the entirety of the enhancements that we wanted to see, in conjunction with the core work that the state is responsible for, along the interstate and its interchanges into our community. Initially, you'll recall, we had quite a bit of discussion about what you'd like to see with respect to those enhancements and the dollars that you were willing to put aside for that. We wanted to remind you of what we've heard in terms of the direction that we received from this group and what the reality is pertaining to what those dollars will actually buy in the form of enhancements in conjunction with the primary work that the state wants to get accomplished. That's why we're here tonight, to talk to you about that, tell you what we think those realities are, and see if you agree and allow us to move forward in terms of amendment, if you will, with our understanding with the state. So if I could turn time to Mr. Beamer.
For the last time, let's have it, sir.
Mayor, council, if you take a look at the date on this very cover sheet, it's over a year ago that we were discussing these enhancement items. So several councilors were not even involved with these discussions back then. But if you can go to the next slide, please. And this includes not only I-25, but also the work on Center Street that's ongoing right now. So we will skip over some of these, but these are just some of the existing conditions. It doesn't look much different now. This construction is just now beginning on this phase of the project. And this is Poplar Street. Next slide, please. And here were some of the proposed enhancements: the RGB lighting, the underpass itself, the wayfinding signage, the terraced walls, the form liners for the concrete, and we even discussed murals quite extensively for the options. And just to remind council, RGB lighting, the wayfinding, and the terraced walls were what was ultimately selected for this underpass, as well as the Center Street underpass. Just to give you a brief reminder of where we went after a number of these types of meetings. Next slide, please. There's the Center Street underpass. Again, looks very similar right now. With the same proposed enhancements, again, the RGB lighting, the wayfinding, the terraced walls. We did not elect to go with the form line concrete or the murals at either one of these locations.
Andrew, will you entertain a question?
I will absolutely entertain.
Thank you, Lisa.
I just have a question regarding the Poplar Street Bridge, or, I guess I'm a little confused.
You go back.
Were they going to do the same thing with Poplar Bridge as they've been doing, that they're gonna do to Center Street and then the other bridge, or are we just beautifying that one?
Mayor, Councilor, very good question. WYDOT project members go from, for this first phase, go from Poplar Street to just west of McKinley Street. So they will be doing these enhancements. Our funding will cover these enhancements at that interchange as well as the Center Street interchange under this current phase.
Right.
I'm not sure if that answers your
Like
question.
Poplar though, because we've got all of this with Poplar, I remember talking about it, but then, so are we just going to add the lighting and remove the things at the Poplar Bridge? Just kind of beautify it, things, but they're not redoing the bridge for 3 years?
This phase includes the Poplar Street interchange, the Center Street interchange, and just goes to the west of the McKinley Street interchange.
Okay.
The next phase goes from where they stop off just west of McKinley Street to the East Yellowstone, and that won't happen for another 3 years.
Oh, okay.
If their STIP plan rolls along as planned.
Thanks, Bruce. I guess for further clarification along Lisa's line of inquiry, the plan though of WYDOT is to rebuild the entire interstate. They've already done the section over by Wyoming Boulevard east side of town, but they're gonna rebuild it all the way to Poplar, correct?
Mayor, Councilor, that's correct.
But they started on that end. Now we're coming to this end and starting and we'll meet.
Yeah, I guess my point was is that I thought that they were gonna get to the Poplar Bridge and I didn't want to spend money doing anything to Poplar if they're gonna come back several years later and.
Mayor,
rip it
council,
all
this
up.
is the first phase. They're starting west and working their way.
They're gonna do the bridge same time we do it.
Yes.
Thank you.
We can scoot forward a few, here's McKinley Street again. Mayor, councilors, we have just now requested the co-op agreement to include this in the enhancements fund. So you have yet to entertain that co-op agreement for those enhancement monies for this phase of the project, but that is coming shortly, because that request has been made. I didn't want to tie up that money with that co-op agreement prematurely until we were ready to move forward with that, with those enhancement contracts.
The original money that we set aside for Poplar and Center Street, it doesn't sound like we've got enough now to do. So we're either gonna have to get rid of some of the stuff we're doing or stretch that money before we even worry about the next one, correct?
Mayor, council, I could jump right to the punchline if you like.
That's where you're kind of leading us, so.
That's exactly where I'm leading. Yes. But we'll get there. Yeah.
Quick fast.
You want to, look, I'm more than happy to speed this up.
I wasn't,
Your last one was sit here and.
We can ignore this because it's not relevant to the enhancement funds for Wyandotte, so we can scoot ahead. And, one more. And another one. And another one. And one more. And we may be done. F Street. We also allocated money, of the enhancement funds to put decorative lighting on the F Street bridge that goes between the showboat and it's now closed,
Echo in or whatever it was, yeah.
I forget what it was called before it did get shuttered
Oh, I didn't.
on the OID.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, no.
So now, councilors, to the punchline, Mayor. Our estimate was 380,000 for the RGB lighting, the terrace walls and the wayfinding signs. The bids came in at 600,000. So we have a shortfall of funding. Now, the landscaping portion, the estimate by CPI, if you recall, this was over a year ago, was 120,000. The bid came in at 260,000. Wow. So the estimate for the RGB lighting and the lighting along the F Street Bridge was 270,000. The bid came in at 340,000. So Mayor, councilors, my recommendation to you is that we proceed with the RGB lighting and the decorative lighting along the F Street Bridge. WYDOT has agreed to participate in the cost for the wayfinding signage, so we can get the wayfinding signage, RGB lighting and the decorative lighting on the F Street Bridge. What we cannot achieve is the terrace walls and that it was really gonna be nominal landscaping, it was mainly gonna be on the backs of the Parks Department then to plant it, because we were just gonna redo some of the irrigation and prepare those beds, but the landscaping itself is gonna be a burden on the Parks Department. So.
But now we'll get the standard walls that we're gonna do anyway.
Mayor, councilors will get the standard walls that they were gonna do anyway.
Sounds good to me.
To bring it within the budget that we have.
Still gonna look fantastic. Huh?
Put a mural.
Well, not necessarily, but I think Amber had, if I remember right, it was Amber that brought up that fact, and we could possibly even get those at no cost to allow artists to display their art, but that have to be tactfully done too, and you know, approved by us before we just have clown art people coming into our city. Which I'm not saying that any of the art they do is clown art. I'm just saying. But even the walls that the state does they're nice. I mean, they're not, you know, they're not junk. It would look very nice with the lighting and the wayfinding signs, which everybody wanted. That would still look very nice, I think. So is everybody okay with that? Dropping off the terrace, just doing the regular walls, but we can keep our lighting and our signage? Okay, how easy was that? I can't believe you want to leave here.
Andrew, you got 10 minutes.
Well,
Stretch.
hey, I'm disappointed you didn't consider councilors or vice mayors Pacheco's thought of a mural of me.
Why don't you come,
Can we do that?
why don't you come on over here and get your nuggets now?
A mural of Andrew.
Yeah, go ahead. Andrew, hang on real quick.
Real quick, on the topic of F Street, it looks like they're about to start doing work on that immediately. Would you be able to fill us in? Because a lot of people use that as kind of throughput there. Is there gonna be any access there, or are you gonna have to go all the way, you're gonna have to find a totally alternative?
Mayor,
And what's the timeline on that?
mayor, council, they were hoping to have that bridge out already. Lumens is holding them up. They've got some fiber strung on that bridge. And in fact, you're gonna be entertaining a license agreement next week so that they can use some city property to run their fiber underneath the river, so they can get it off the bridge deck, so that Ames Construction can demolish that. But that bridge will be out of service for an extended period of time.
Probably over a year, I'm guessing, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so you'll have to take the interstate, I guess, and jump off and come around.
Go to Rotary every Monday, so I'm gonna have to.
I go to work every day.
Yeah, have to get used to some different scenery. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Andrew.
It almost makes me sad to see him go. Honestly. Okay, agenda review, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is the opportunity where we talk about the grid document and go through some of its implications and so on.
I'll pack that in,
And I
especially if you're trying to read. Like, I know when I'm reading the script, I'm like, but I would think they could put white bulbs in there at least. And it would be.
As council is aware, and we've already talked about, next week will be critical for us in that we will be talking about the fiscal year 24 budget and hopefully getting your blessing to move forward, as well as the budget amendment number 3 for the current fiscal year also. We do have the second reading of the NEC coming up next week, and a couple of those other items that we've been following through in the 3 reading process that you are very familiar with. 1 cent 17 community projects will also be tied up next week as well. And that'll take us through a very pivotal, critical meeting for the as we close up the current fiscal year and start the new one. As to some of the other work session topics that we have coming up, the coalition has been visiting about a number of social issues to include homelessness is coming to visit with you in the work session of the 27th. We'll also be potentially starting our business plans as it relates to the recreational enterprises, a couple of the recreational enterprises that we're hoping to get your blessing for implementation purposes. We have, we'll be starting the new fiscal year on a Wednesday this coming July. As you'll recall, the 4th, it's a Tuesday night. And it didn't make sense to try to have our first fiscal year business meeting during the July 4th holiday. So that will be the 5th, that first meeting. And then I like to direct your attention to the very back page, the future agenda item page for the prospectus for the next several months. You can see some of these we've already sort of loosely tied to a couple upcoming months here and beyond. This is for the purpose, however, of giving you the opportunity to make sure we've got items that you're concerned about and want to have addressed by the council on the horizon here. So please let us know if there are items or topics that are missing from that back page so they can get docketed in due time. And that's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
I thank you, sir.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Next week, I will be calling in from a Zoom meeting, but then on the 27th, I will not be available.
Next week's a regular council meeting, you'd be on Zoom, and then the following work session, you'll be gone. Okay. So noted. Thank you, yes. Anybody else have any questions or comments on the agenda reviews or anything missing? Anybody needed on there or? No? Okay, sir?
There's just I don't know if we reached a decision about, but I can bring it up during round the table, but about the judge's evaluation.
No, now would probably be an appropriate time to talk about that. So we have a liaison committee that meets with our judge every month. One of the things that we had talked about with her, and we've all been part of that discussion, was having a different and a new evaluation process for her, since we're not actively participating with her like we do the city manager and the city attorney. And so she gave 4 different types of evaluation forms that she feels would be more appropriate to evaluate her with. So Mr. Bond was going to send them to me. I was going to get them printed off and get them to you. And then we would have a work session to decide which one best fits what we're looking to do. Is everybody okay with that, or anybody? Yeah. Okay, so if you'll get those sent to me, I'll get them printed off, and then Carter, if we can get that on a future.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And then that way we can kind of all put our heads together and come up with a more fair way to do that. And within the next couple of weeks, we will have the camera set up that, you know, for the counselors to be able to do their evaluating with. And so that should be just as nice as well. And we'll get you that information as soon as Letitia has it ready. Thank you for that, Mr. Vaughn. Okay, legislative review, sir.
I have nothing.
Okay, amazing. We're whipping through it tonight. Council around the table. Let's start with Lisa.
Went to the WAM conference in Cody last week. Learned a lot of things. It's always kind of enjoyable to talk to other municipalities and learn different things of what they're doing and the struggles that they've got. And then I do have a contractor board meeting tomorrow, and boy, is CNFR is in town.
Oh, yes. I have a question for you. Is it when you're talking to them, do they kind of have a lot of the same issues we are? Does it sound like you're looking in the mirror when they're talking to you, or do they have like a completely different set of issues than what we deal with here? I'm just curious.
I think we're all experiencing the same similar kind of scenarios.
The crime, the drugs, a lot of that.
Homelessness, all kinds of
Employment issues.
It's all very similar.
Housing's a big one.
And employment, right? Lack of employees, that. And homelessness also, huh?
Well, I've talked to some communities to where they were also saying that buses of people have been dropped off, so it is creating problems in all the communities in the state.
It's definitely frustrating. I know we've put together a coalition to start helping address this so that we can try to get a handle on it, but it's gonna be a long road to hoe, for sure. Thank you. Ms. Jensen?
Well, personally, I don't think I really have a whole lot either, except for I wanted to do a shout out and a congratulations to Detective Elhard being named the Lawman of the Year for 2022. It's pretty cool that she got awarded that. Thank you for her service.
I think that was given to her by was it the Rotary?
The VFW, what's the other one?
Legion.
Thanks to American Legion.
Yeah. I got to go to the one,
Same one.
it was, okay. So yeah, she's well deserving. That was really nice. And they had a nice ceremony for her at David Street Station that I attended.
And then it's CNFR, so I hope
Yeah, baby.
everybody's practicing the skills and being welcoming to our community and promoting our local businesses so that those people come out and spend some money in our local shops in downtown and everywhere.
You've obviously been in leadership way too long, Mr. Parade Man. I saw that. You have to wave.
Cowboys.
Thank you, Jenna. Did you have anything else? Okay, thank you. Mr. Gamera?
Thanks, Bruce. Joined Lisa and the city manager and Cody, for WAM last week. I always really like going to WAM. Not only because it's reassuring to hear from other municipalities that they're struggling with a lot of the same things, but also just the people, the local elected officials, it's a totally different, in my experience, at least totally different group of folks in state legislature and certainly Congress. Very community oriented people that, there's not partisan bickering or anything. It's just always focused on community. And so I love, going to WAM. Cause it's good people wanting to do good things for their community. It's just a good atmosphere. It was the highest turnout they've had for any WAM convention, I believe. And so, it was great to have, almost every single municipality is represented, 99 out of 100. The last holdout is Rock Springs. We're really trying to get them involved so that we can have 100% conformity and have every municipality represented so that our lobbying power in the legislature is even more powerful. I got to spend a lot of time with the folks over at Douglas, their mayor, city admin, and a couple of their council members. Ate dinner with the mayor Sheridan. Spoke a lot to the mayor of Pinedale. So it's a great opportunity to be able to connect with these folks and again just talk about. We come up with some great ideas here on this council, but there's very smart, intelligent, out of the box thinkers in the rest of the state, and so it's cool to be able to hear the solutions that they're presenting in their communities. And I always get a lot of nuggets of knowledge that hopefully we can implement and utilize here. We had a reception at the Buffalo Bill Center of the West and the governor joined us. And so I was glad to see the governor, speaking with people, and we had dinner at Cody Cattle Company, which was a very interesting. I'm just ashamed I hadn't spent much time up in Cody before. So it was just a very beautiful town, especially with all the recent rain and just a nice experience. I wanted to point out to folks, because we've talked about utility assistance in the past couple of weeks. I wanted to acknowledge somebody, one of city staff put together a nice little resource page. It's on page 8 of our info packet for folks that do struggle with utilities or maybe in a bind. Lots of resources there from Community Action Partnership, Interface, Salvation Army, again, the LEAP and LEWAP programs. And so I would refer people to that page 8 of our info packet if they want to use that resource. If you're a case manager or if you're somebody that might struggle with your utility bills, it was a nice kind of centralized source of knowledge. And then lastly, I wanted to bring up the fact that Wildfile did a really great 4-part series on fentanyl in the state. And in light of some of our recent discussions we've had, I would encourage y'all to go read those 4 different articles. I was curious, there was a resource there that I wasn't familiar with, and I guess it's called ODMAP. And it sounds like it's very real-time kind of current data on overdoses in our community. Part of that series of reporting, if you go look and see, you'll notice that January of this year, we had 27, I believe, suspected overdoses, which is far and above our 5-year average. And so that series highlighted the fentanyl issue, I think, that is going on in the state, but really that ODMAP, I think, has information that could really help inform us, especially in how we are planning to use our opioid settlement money. And so there are some concerns about making that information too public. Wyoming's a very small place. And so, you don't want to expose people's kind of personal or confidential information. And sometimes you can with just how small our population is. You release some of that data and it's very clear who they're talking about. So there are some privacy concerns there, but if there's anything, maybe an executive session or something, we can discuss this information. I'm very interested in that. So I don't know if the, chief would have access to that or could maybe give us a presentation on that data at some point, but I'm interested in it. And I guess I would just encourage folks to look at that Wildfile reporting. Again, it was a really great job. I forget the name of the reporter, but she did a really good job. So.
Nice. Well, thank you. Councilor Bond.
Just to kind of piggyback on the municipal court information. So Councilor Haskins and I met with the judge yesterday. We also had the opportunity to meet we met with Letitia, the clerk, and as well as the probation officer. Just kind of got a sense of how they kind of work together as a team. And then, we talked about the whole evaluation issue, which is not really the purpose of our committee, but we decided that was kind of urgent and necessary to deal with. So I'm glad to hear we'll have a work session about that. And, that we'll be hopefully bringing forward a draft, kind of a purpose and some goal statements for the committee to council to approve. So just kind of in terms of make sure we're doing the right, as the liaison committee, doing the right work that you want us to do, so.
Very good.
And then, last thing is, second thing is, I did want to just extend my congratulations also to Detective Gail Hart, in recognition of her being honored, and it's a great recognition. And last thing is, Nick Fest is this weekend as well. Starts Friday night, just kind of piggybacks off of, CNFR, and, the fun extends into the weekend. So there's live bands Friday night, Saturday, all day Saturday, and part of Sunday. Come down and see the artists. We'll have an artist tent. There'll be artists in the building. Lots of family, whole kid zone, family zone area. So come on down and enjoy the nucleus, and food trucks. It's everybody there. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Counselor Haskins?
Yeah, so yes, we met with the judge, and it's curious that you brought up alternatives because we did spend a good portion of our time learning what exactly they're trying to do at the municipal court to not just send people to jail, including classes at the Mercer House. The probation officers are helping with the interface and other places for ASIs to see if they need for that. They're also helping with housing. They work with healthcare for the homeless. They give them community service if they have their $50 to work it off. So it was very interesting. We heard a couple success stories about a erratic individual who turned out had massive concussions, and the judge was able to find someone who could help house them. So it's remarkable, some of the things we're learning about how we are getting creative so as not to only put them in jail, which again shows just how much our crime has increased. So thank a police officer. I'm sure they're tired. Sounds like they're all working harder than they should have to. And last but not least, I want to shout out to the 3 firemen who came to my office this week and ultimately busted down a door to get my nurse out of our room. So thanks for that.
Did she lock herself in the room?
The doorknob broke and they tried everything. They ultimately had to kick the door in.
Wow.
But
Rudes.
it was emergent.
There you go, Jake.
They might have been ogled, by the way, and I'm really sorry. It's an office full of women.
Thank you.
That's it. I'm good.
Vice Mayor.
The other thing I have is, so when I came on to city council, 9 years ago, I didn't get to know Andrew very well. And, but over the time at the first, I was like, oh, who is this guy? And, but over that course of time that I've worked with him, I found him to be one of the most genuine human beings that works here, and incredibly, incredibly talented, what he does and the work that he has done here for us, and the time that I've spent working with you. And when I don't see him, when I see him outside out in the community, he's always kind and always generous to me and talks to me, and we have a great conversation. So I hope we can continue that as well. But I appreciate all the time and effort you've done. You deserve to be able to go on and enjoy yourself, but I want you to know you'll be missed very dearly. I know we give you a hard time a lot, and but you're going to become very, very missed and irreplaceable. So thank you for all you've done for us over the years, and certainly I know from my heart I'm going to miss you. So thank you, Andrew.
That was very nice. If it isn't you, it's Salima. That's who I pick on. And now you're going to be gone, so that means double for her until I find somebody else. So she's either going to have to thicken up, or you're going to have to come visit every once in a while.
She's pretty thick already.
Okay, I just have a few things. I guess you could say what you want when you're leaving, right? CNFR is going on right now, and they are breaking records attendance wise. You want to go watch some supreme athletes take on some supreme animals. It's going on at the event center as we speak, and it goes through Sunday, which is family day for Casper. I'll see all you folks Thursday night there for government night. Your tickets will be in will call if you haven't received them already. And I think we go in through that far door like we did last year. And so that'll be fun. Be there at 5 o'clock. I'm delivering the State of the City address tomorrow to the Chamber of Commerce. So that'll be exciting for me, I guess. All the rain we've got has exposed our high need of being able to deal with our stormwater. For folks that don't know and they hear the stormwater word thrown around, what that does is that takes all of our rainwater and everything else and takes it to the city. And we had so much, in fact, that Collins was a literal flood swimming pool and it even trapped a couple cars in it. So it's a $40 million project that we're currently putting $40,000 a year towards. We are in a major shortfall when it comes to our stormwater, but with everything else, you know, people like to point fingers about how taxpayer money gets wasted. I could promise you this city does not waste taxpayer money. Infrastructure, roads, you know, it's never ending. And so the stormwater is just one more thing on our plate we're going to have to figure out at some point as a council, because, you know, we can't just kick that can down the road anymore, as Collins Street proved to us. So where that money comes from, I don't know. Thank God for the 5th cent and that our voters recognize that that's vitally important to our infrastructure needs in the city of Casper. I don't know. Anyway, next Tuesday, we will have our regularly scheduled city council meeting right here at 6 o'clock. All right, pre-meeting 5:30 and meeting at 6 o'clock. I hope you guys have a great week. Go out and enjoy all that this town has to offer. There's live music everywhere. In fact, I've been hearing it bumping through the wall here while we're in here. So have an enjoyable week. See you next Tuesday. Did you?
Yeah.
Took care of it?
Yeah, I signed it.
Okay.